Hello and welcome to the History Unravelled podcast episode 1, where we like to rummage around in the attics of human history and see what we can plunder. How did textiles grow from prehistoric hand looms to clothing the first humans in space? I'm Zoe, your host, and today's topic is how wool and other spun fibres changed the world. I hope you enjoy this new format. I cut out so many tangents from my long-form content because it's just not relevant. And so much of this first episode exists because I just wanted a way to share this particular little ramble that I went on in my last video. I would like to dedicate today's episode to Joan Arnold, my beloved grandma who passed away unexpectedly over Christmas. It is not an understatement to say that without the influence of both my grandmother's love of textiles and craft, this channel would not be what it is today. Grandma Joan taught me how to knit hats, how to crochet, and encouraged a sense of discovery when it comes to sewing and textile art that she carried with her entire life. I just wanted to honour her contribution to my work in this episode. I don't want this first podcast to be sad, so I've decided that going forward I'm including at least one silly joke in each episode. Today's joke is this. What do you call a sheep covered in chocolate? A candy bar. Yeah, it's awful. I apologise. It made me laugh. It's so bad. This particular tangent was in no small part inspired by the incredible book The Lost Flock by Jane Cooper. Jane left a suburban life to live on the island of Orkney with her husband and to steward a flock of one of the rarest sheep breeds in Britain, the Borroway. As the breed faced near extinction prior to active conservation efforts by organisations such as the Rare Breed Trust and dedicated shepherds, shepherdesses and stewards such as Jane and her family, they are a primitive breed that still naturally sheds their wool, which is just incredible. If you enjoyed Wilding by Isabella, you will absolutely love this. This is sheep's answer to Wilding.
You know, knitting and textile making is such an innately human thing to do that I feel to disregard its importance throughout history and to humanity is to lose such a vast swathe of history. Refusing to interpret textile history only gives you half the story. We've all heard about Vikings and their ships, and the metalworking and the woodcraft and the manual labour by men that it took to get Vikings across the seas of Europe to raid and pillage and eventually to settle places like the UK where I live. And we're all taught at school about the Viking raids and the swords and the battles. Nobody ever talks about who made the sails of a Viking ship, because every single Viking ship that sailed across Europe during the Viking Age of Expansion, during their attempts to settle a significant portion of mainland Europe.
Viking means a raider. The Vikings are more correctly referred to as Norsemen and Norse settlers here.
So much of the contribution of textile makers, which in that society were primarily female, is completely disregarded from the historical record until relatively recently. I've been listening to an absolutely fantastic book called The Lost Flock, and there was a chapter about how wool and the textile industry influenced Viking expansion across Europe, and it was absolutely a fascinating take on a topic that I feel is all too frequently utterly disregarded as a proper field of study. I know that all too often textile history is erased under a lens of misogyny
and racism. Racism's effect on the erasing of massive amounts of textile cultural heritage cannot be disregarded.
It is seen to have less inherent value because of the people who produced it. And it disregards the fact that without textile manufacture, the world would not be where it is today. Without people spinning enough flax or hemp or wool to weave these sails, to care for the sheep, to shear the sheep, to spin the wool, to plant the flax, to process everything. Without textiles, Romans would never have been able to create an empire. Without textiles, no Viking would ever be able to sail a longship around Europe and terrorize the monks on Lindisfarne. Without textiles and the technology that it took to make the first spacesuits, man would never have walked on the moon or survived space travel. We are, in our modern day lives, surrounded by textiles. We have carpets on our floors, textiles in our curtains. We wear a range of fibers everywhere. But it's easy to see these as almost non-entities because of how ubiquitous it is. In today's world of fast fashion, it's easy to underestimate the true amount of labor that went into making clothing and making decorative objects. The time that it takes, the hours of labor, the days or months it takes to perfect a skill in order to be able to do a textile craft. It's so easy to underestimate the impact that that would have had on people's lives and how much time it would have taken. Now in the Victorian era, this is the age of the Industrial Revolution. You can get machine knit stockings. You can get shirts that have been sewn on a machine. This is the age where fast fashion is really beginning to become a part of society, where even 100 years prior, it would have been a complete anathema at the beginning of the 19th century could ever have predicted where they would be at the end of the 19th century, in much the same way that nobody in 1901 could have predicted just what would happen throughout the 20th century and all of its incredible and tumultuous period of history that we have, that is so close to us today and yet so incredibly far away. I work in an art gallery and I frequently take my spinning or my knitting or other textile crafts with me so I can do while I am manning the desk. I would like to say that this does not mean I'm skiving. This is a perfectly acceptable thing to do and something we are encouraged to do. But it's fascinating when I take my work with me on the days that I work in the gallery, is that so many people are interested in the kinds of work I'm doing, and I get a lot of questions about what I'm working on and how I do things and what am I doing. And for knitting, you know, most people can identify knitting at a glance. They might confuse it with crochet, but generally speaking, I'd say nearly everyone in the English-speaking world knows what knitting is. Spinning, however, is something that is not always immediately obvious to people. Most people nowadays, I would say, on the street probably couldn't identify a drop spindle and wouldn't know what it's for, let alone have ever seen anyone using one.
And why should they? Drop spindles were once as ubiquitous as our mobile phones are today, but are now about as common as, well, a working public phone box.
I would say that most people can probably identify a spinning wheel, especially if you grew up watching Sleeping Beauty. But you probably don't know how it works precisely. So it's always interesting to me to do things like knitting and spinning in public. Not because I want attention, but frankly because I bring my projects with me because I don't like to sit and be bored. I get itchy fingers and then I get anxious. So for me, bringing something like knitting or spinning on a drop spindle or my embroidery or my sewing, it's such a natural thing for me to do, to bring it wherever I go, to have it on hand so that when I'm in situations where I become restless, I'm able to do something.
For me, I bring a piece of textile work with me wherever I go for mental health reasons. During prehistory and right up until the early to mid-medieval era, people were still weaving enough cloth to clothe them and their local communities, especially in more isolated rural areas. People would be taking their spinning with them pretty much wherever they went. There are songs and poems and illustrations showing people walking to and from church or to and from market, and they are working a drop spindle the entire time that they're walking. A lot of people used to knit and walk as well. The industrial world that we live in really spoils us in how immediate the gratification of textile work is. And I think that's why I love so much of the historical side of textile work, because it really gives you an appreciation for what our ancestors went through just to clothe themselves. And it's something that we nowadays just do for fun.
I hope that you enjoyed this. It is definitely a bit nerve-wracking to put out something so different to my normal content, but hopefully people enjoy it, and let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know if you would have any subjects you'd like me to cover in future podcasts. I think that could be kind of fun. So without further ado, I'm going to wish you a very happy 2025.
Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to keep up to date with podcast episodes and the other videos that I put out on YouTube, if you enjoy history, sewing, knitting, crochet, spinning, sheep, I highly recommend that you subscribe so you don't miss out, and if you press the bell notification, YouTube will occasionally, if the wind is blowing in the right direction, let you know when I post. Thank you and goodbye.